In this video, we're going to cover the basics of primary resources or just resources. If you come here to data maintenance, you have those two options here, one called resources, another one called resource groups. Resources are essentially what you're seeing in the y-axis of your Gantt chart. So those are the entities that will process operations. Resource groups are groups of resources, right? So very basically here. In this example, we have assembly resource group that contains from assembly 01 to 05. And if you look at a test bay, we have test bay 01, 2, and 3 belonging to this test bay resource group. And we have two spiraling resources that belongs to the spiraling resource group. So all of those resources, they are in here. And a resource group is basically used for Opcenter APS scheduling rules to test what resources can be used for a given operation. So looking here at the spiraling, we have two options. So what Opcenter APS will do, it will first test spiraling 01, save its conclusion date, end date, after the sequencing there. Then it will schedule the same operation in spiraling 02. It will then write down the completion date in that resource. It will then compare both of those completion dates. And you will say, okay, I am finishing sooner in spiraling 1. I will then schedule in spiraling 1. If I'm finishing sooner in spiraling 2, then I will schedule in spiraling 2. Okay? So let's test that concept in the sequencer. Okay, so I have some operations already scheduled here. Zooming in, you see that profiling only have one option, and extrusion also only have one option, but spiraling, you have two different options. Spiraling 1 runs a little bit faster than spiraling 2, so you see that when I drag and drop into those resources, the end time of the operation changes. So whenever both of them are available at the same time, Opcenter APS will always prioritize scheduling 1 because it's finishing sooner, right? So if I reschedule this, you see that it selected spiraling 2. You can force, let's say that we have a planned maintenance for this week in the spiraling 1 machine. So if you do so, and you ask for a reschedule, Opcenter APS will then test on both of them again. It will say that for spiraling 1, this is my completion date, and for spiraling 2, this is my completion date. Then, of course, it will schedule in select the spiraling 2 machine. So let's test that out, and there we go. If you want to force that it needs to go into spiraling 1, there are two ways to do so. So double click the operation resources here. You see required resource. You can force it to a given resource, right? So I'm forcing it to spiraling 1. So if I now reschedule, even though spiraling 1 is finishing later, it's prioritizing it because you forced it through the required resource field. Another way to do so is, so let me remove this to select from group, rescheduling it. And there we go, selecting 02 again. Another way to do so is through the auto sequencing option. So if I remove the auto sequencing option from spiraling 2 and I ask a new schedule, now the auto sequencing is only testing spiraling 1. And because of that, of course, it's going to select spiraling 1. Okay, so those are the two options that we have available. Okay, so I'm auto schedule this again. And let me come back to on shifting here. Okay, so let's test another concept, which is the prioritization of resources. And for that, I will force that both of operations have exactly the same duration. So I'm going to put 20 hours as time per batch, and doesn't matter if I'm scheduling in spiraling 01 or 02, both of them will take 20 hours. So it's a match, right? So both of them, both of those resources, they are finishing the operation exactly at the same time. And Opcenter APS uses this queue here, this sequencing here, to set what is the highest priority resources that it needs to select. In this case, the higher in this list, the higher the priority. So it's selecting operation Sparling 01 because it's the first one, it's higher in this list. But let's put Sparling 2 first. Now, if you reschedule, it will prioritize Sparling 2 resource. So keep that in mind. This is very important to understand why Opcenter APS is balancing out the way it is, okay? And most people, they are not aware of this functionality. Another way to control the selection, so I'll come back to Sparling 1 as the first priority, it's the selection timeout. So selection timeout is the amount of time you are willing to wait to prioritize a given resource. So in this example, both of them are finishing exactly at the same time. So it's a tie. But if you are willing to wait, let me say that I have a selection timeout here of 5 hours. So now if I schedule, you see that it's selecting Sparling 2, even though both of them are finishing at the same time, and Sparling 1 is the priority in this priority list here, in this validated resource data list. But even so, it's waiting, it's prioritizing Sparling 2 because of the selection timeout. So in order to better demonstrate that, let me put a calendar exception here at the end time of this operation. So I'm gonna add here, and it should last, let's say, for 3 hours. Okay, so it's a plan and maintenance. And let me come back to the way it is without a selection timeout. I'm gonna put -1 here. Now, of course, it is selecting the first one because it's finishing sooner, right? But let's say that I want to prioritize Sparling 2, but of course there is a limit to this prioritization. Maybe Sparling 2 it's a cheaper machine and you want to prioritize because of this. So utilizing the selection timeout does exactly that. So let's put that 10 hours here. And then even though it's finishing later, it's selecting Sparling 2. But what if I have a much longer, let's say this is only finishing at 8 p.m. Now, if I reschedule, it will select Sparling 1 because my selection timeout it's only 10 hours. And the difference between this end time and this end time is greater than 10 hours. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. It's a very useful feature if you want to prioritize certain machines over other machines. Okay, so there is another concept here, and let me remove this hold here. Place on planning board. Okay, great. So you see that I have, and let me remove that timeout from there because I want to as default as possible. Okay. So you see that I have two Sparling operations, one after the other. Okay, and this here, it's a possibility, right? So let me put here a selection timeout on this operation, on this resource, sorry. Selection timeout of 1 day. There we go. But sometimes you want subsequent operations on the same resource to be, that can go on the same resource to be on the same resource. So there is no movement between those two resources here, right? So this is something that might be useful to reduce shop floor movement. Utilizing this set subsequent resource group, it is a way to do so, okay? So it's a resource group. What I'm gonna do then, I'm gonna create a resource group with just one spiraling machine. So I'm gonna call it spiraling 01. I will add the spiraling spiraling 01 to it, and I will create a new resource group called spiraling 02 with only the spiraling 02 on it. Okay. So looking at this, the current auto schedule, it's selecting spiraling 02 because it has a selection timeout. So that means I need to pick up the end product here and send to this machine, right? But you can change this behavior if you then add a subsequent resource group. In this case, it's spiraling 01. Now, what you're telling Opcenter is that if you schedule this operation in spiraling 01, the next operation, if it can go into spiraling 1 machine, please prioritize and put it there. Okay, so that's essentially what you're telling the system. And that's what happens here. Okay, and this doesn't matter. Let me put here a huge planned maintenance with gonna take 8 days. So huge planned maintenance. So it doesn't matter. Of course, in this case, it's selecting spiraling 2. So let me put spiraling 1 as required resource for this operation. Okay. So you see, so let me reduce the duration of this one just a little bit. Let's say it's 20 seconds here. There we go. Yeah. So you see that this operation is ending much later because it's scheduled in this, going through this planned maintenance. It doesn't matter. It's going to look at the subsequent resource group from the previous operation in order to set what are the resources that can be used for this particular operation. But of course, it doesn't need to be a single resource, right? Because the set subsequent resource group field requires a resource group. What we did, we created a single resource group containing 1 machine. But if you select here spiraling again, of course, it's not going to make a lot of sense, but it could be a resource group with different resources here, right? Now, of course, it will then select spiraling 2 because the subsequent resource group for this one is spiraling 2, and this here can go into spiraling 1 and 2, okay? So let's then force it to go into spiraling 1, and you see that doesn't matter, it's still required resource, auto sequencing, those fields, they are still used, okay? Now let me pick up probably gonna need to schedule all of them. Okay, So let me pick up only this. Let me maintain here only this operation. There we go. You see that we have higher possibility of resources. Okay? So let me then, okay, so yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Everything that I told you before using only 2 resources, they are also valid here, right? So for example, if I put this in planned maintenance, put this one in planned maintenance, this one in planned maintenance, and if I now ask for a reschedule of this order, you see that it's selecting the assembly 4 because it's finishing sooner, okay? So that's what I wanted to demonstrate very quickly here. Another very important concept, it's the difference between a finite resource and an infinite resource. All of those, they are from profiling to test base 03, all of those are finite resources. That means that when I schedule here, I can only do one operation after the other. So if I try to drag and drop this operation in here, in parallel with this operation or with this operation, for example, it's going to rearrange and automatically reschedule, push over impacted operations. So you will never see parallel operations in here. The only way you can see parallel operations is when you are using the use actual times field. So for example, if I say that this operation now has a use actual times, means that it's fixed in this position. If you use actual times for this one here as well, so let's say that this started 1 day ago, then you see that you can even put operations in off-shift periods. So the use actual times is mostly to replicate what has happened in your shop floor, to control actual execution of the operation, right? So keep that in mind that this is the only way you can have parallel operations for a finite resources, okay? So let me remove this, let me remove this. At the other hand, infinite resources, so let me change this to all resources. I don't have a process time for all resources here, so let me put a time per item of 10 minutes, that's fine. Yeah, I'm gonna put this here in external, all resources, or just select the external. Oh, it's not here. So all resources, operation time, time per item. So now I have 2 operations here in this external resource. And if I drag and drop, you see that I can have parallel operations, okay? So whenever you are scheduling infinite resources, keep that in mind that that's the main difference, is if you can or cannot have parallel operations on it. And if you want to control how many operations you have in parallel, you're going to need to create a secondary constraint and set the limit there on the secondary constraint, and of course assign this secondary constraint to the resources from here, for example, or directly from here. Okay, and yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you.